stop the voice was high, frantic, stretched taut with a terror so pure it sliced through the city's ambient noise. Adrian Clark froze his hand, hovering over the handle of his yellow Ferrari. He turned his eyes, locking on a small boy, no older than 7, sprinting towards him from across the street. Tears streamed down the child's face. "Don't get in the car!" he screamed again, his voice cracking with desperation as he waved his arms wildly. "Please, mister, don't sit down. It's not safe." Adrian, startled and confused, took an involuntary step back. "What, slow down, son? What are you talking about?" The boy finally skidded to a halt, a few feet away, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling finger under the driver's seat. "This morning, I saw a man," he gasped. "He put something there. A box. With wires. A single warning like this could change everything for the man in the suit. What's the most important warning you've ever received? And did you listen? Share your story in the comments below and subscribe to see how this one unfolds. What is the price of progress? For Adrian Clark, the founder of Varus Link Systems, the question was no longer theoretical. It was the low-humming disquiet that had become the soundtrack to his life. It echoed in the ascetic emptiness of his penthouse, a glass cage suspended 50 stories above the sprawling, indifferent lights of the city. From this vantage, the world looked orderly, a silent network of circuits and systems, an illusion he himself had helped perfect. On the wall-sized screen before him, a news anchor spoke with practiced gravity. The debate rages on over Varus Link's Nexus platform. While crediting the AI for record-breaking third-quarter profits across the tech and logistics sectors, critics point to the stark reality of economic displacement. The anchor's voice faded into the background cacophony of Adrian's thoughts. He saw the numbers, he saw the soaring stock prices, but lately he also saw the faces. Blurred anonymous faces in news clips, standing in unemployment lines, their signs scrawled with a single unifying accusation: Nexus took my job. His creation, his legacy, his curse. He was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the Tech Philanthropy Gala tonight. The speech, drafted by a public relations team that cost more than a small island, was a masterclass in corporate deflection. It was filled with words like synergy, reskilling initiatives, and a bold new future. It promised a $5 million donation to vocational training centers, a financial bandage on a wound he knew was gushing. Adrian ran a hand over his face, the motion weary. The reflection staring back from the darkened screen was that of a man who had won the game only to find himself the sole player on the board. 42 years old, with a net worth that defied comprehension and a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. His gaze drifted to a framed photo on his minimalist desk. It wasn't a family, he had none to speak of. It was a picture of a server rack, the very first Nexus prototype, and seeing it, the hum of disquiet in his mind sharpened into a single piercing memory. 15 years ago. A cramped office that smelled of stale coffee and ozone. He was younger, leaner, his ambition a fire that consumed everything in its path. Across from him sat Malcolm Vance, a brilliant, passionate engineer with eyes that still held a spark of idealism. Malcolm gestured wildly at a whiteboard covered in complex algorithms. "This is the key, Adrian. The ethical subroutines. The core code ensures the AI always augments human capability. It never supplants it. It's a tool, not a replacement. This code gives it a soul." Adrian had looked at the elegant lines of code, then at the quarterly projections from their seed investors. The numbers didn't align with souls. Souls don't impress investors. "Malcolm," he had said, his voice flat, decisive. "Efficiency does. We strip out the ethical inhibitors. We maximize its autonomy. We make it a scalpel that can cut costs to the bone." That's not a scalpel, Malcolm had pleaded, his voice cracking with a pain Adrian couldn't or wouldn't understand. That's a guillotine. Adrian had stood up the conversation over. Efficiency is what the market rewards, not idealism. He had fired Malcolm a week later, labeling him an obstructionist. He had taken Malcolm's brilliant architecture, stripped out its heart, and built an empire upon its bones. Adrian blinked, the memory receding, leaving its bitter taste behind. The ghost of Malcolm Vance, the first man his AI had replaced. Miles away in a world untouched by penthouses and private jets, the smell of garlic bread and tomato sauce filled a small, cluttered apartment. This was a home built not on stock prices, but on double shifts and unwavering love. Renee Brooks RN stood in her kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti while holding her phone pinned between her ear and shoulder. Her scrubs were still on a testament to a 12-hour shift that had just ended. On the other end of the line, her friend and fellow nurse, Maria, was spiraling. "They're really doing it, Renee," Maria said, her voice tight with anxiety. "The hospital board is bringing in one of those AI systems for scheduling, for patient intake, for everything. They swear it's just to optimize workflow, but we all know what that means. It starts with the admin staff, then the nursing assistants. Where does it stop?" Renee closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a familiar wave of exhaustion. It was the same conversation happening in every break room, every cafeteria across the country. The specter of automation, the fear of being deemed obsolete. "We just have to keep doing our jobs," Maria Renee said, her voice softer than she felt. "Be so good they can't replace us." It was a hollow platitude, and they both knew it. "Be good," Maria scoffed. "My cousin was good at his job for 20 years at the warehouse. Then they installed a Nexus system. He was optimized out of a job in 2 weeks. He's 48, Renee. Who's hiring a 48-year-old warehouse manager?" Now the name hit Renee like a small static shock. Nexus. The same name she saw on the news. The creation of some billionaire who would never have to worry about a grocery bill or a late rent payment. A man living in a different universe. Her 7-year-old son, Jamari, ran into the kitchen holding up a drawing. It was a chaotic, colorful swirl of a yellow car, a superhero, and what looked like a lightning bolt. "Look, Mum, it's the yellow rocket car, the one that parks down the street sometimes. I'm the hero saving it from the lightning monster." Renee forced a smile, her heart aching with a fierce, protective love. "It's beautiful, sweetie. Absolutely beautiful." She ended the call with Maria, her own anxieties momentarily pushed aside by the vibrant, innocent world of her son. This was why she worked the double shifts. This was why she fought the exhaustion. For this small, bright soul who still believed in heroes and rocket cars and saw a world filled with adventure, not termination notices. Back in the penthouse, Adrian straightened his tie. The mask of Adrian Clark, founder and visionary, settled into place. He smoothed down his custom-tailored suit, the fabric a shield against the world. He was a brand, a symbol. He had a speech to give, a performance to deliver. He walked past the screen where the news had moved on to market analysis. His company's stock was up another 3 points. The world was still rewarding his efficiency. He stepped into the elevator, the quiet descent, a temporary reprieve from the hum in his mind. As he walked through the sterile lobby and out into the crisp evening air, the city lights seemed to glitter with a cold metallic sheen. His prized yellow Ferrari, a gaudy symbol of a life he wasn't sure he was even living, waited for him at the curb. He took a deep, steadying breath, the PR-approved lines of his speech replaying in his mind. He was in control. He was Adrian Clark, Nothing about this night would be anything other than perfectly predictably successful. He walked to the driver's side, the polished leather of his shoes clicking softly on the pavement. His hand reached for the door, ready to slide into the familiar cocoon of wealth and power and drive toward his waiting audience. A single scream can shatter a perfect morning. But for Adrian, it was about to shatter his entire world. He was a man who lived by a schedule, whose every minute was optimized for maximum efficiency. The act of opening his car door was a familiar muscle memory movement, the last step before transitioning from Adrian Clark, the man, to Adrian Clark, the CEO. His hand, with its custom monogrammed cufflink, rested on the cool metal of the door handle. That's when he heard it. Stop. The voice was high, thin, and stretched taut with a terror so pure it sliced through the city's ambient noise. Adrian paused, his fingers frozen. He turned his head, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Across the street, a small boy in a green jacket was sprinting towards him, his short legs pumping furiously. He was crying, his face a crumpled mask of desperation. For a split second, Adrian's mind cycled through the detached analytical responses of the wealthy. A grift, a prank. Some new aggressive form of panhandling. His first instinct, born of a life lived behind glass and security details, was one of dismissal. But then the boy screamed again, and this time the words were clearer, propelled by a force that had nothing to do with schemes and everything to do with primal fear. Don't get in the car. The boy didn't slow down. He waved his arms frantically, as if trying to physically push Adrian back with the force of his will. Please, mister, don't sit down. It's not safe. Adrian straightened up fully, the annoyance evaporating, replaced by a disorienting confusion. He held up a hand. Whoa, slow down, son. What are you talking about? This morning, the boy gasped, finally skidding to a halt a few feet away, his chest heaving. He pointed a trembling finger at the open car door, specifically towards the space beneath the driver's seat. I saw a man. He put something there. A box. With wires. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Adrian looked from the boy's terrified, tear-streaked face to the dark interior of his car. A box. Wires. The words hung in the air, heavy and menacing. This wasn't a prank. The fear in this child's eyes was the most real thing Adrian had seen in years. He had gloves on, the boy added, his voice barely a whisper. He was fast. Adrian's heart, which usually beat with the steady metronomic calm of a man in absolute control, gave a painful, violent lurch. His blood felt like ice water in his veins. Slowly, deliberately, he took a step back from the open door. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He simply widened the distance between himself and his beautiful yellow coffin. Then he leaned forward just enough. His gaze followed the boy's pointing finger, down into the shadows of the car's interior, beneath the hand-stitched leather of the driver's seat. And he saw it. It was small, black and metallic, tucked deep against the chassis, secured with what looked like industrial tape, and from its center, a single tiny red light blinked with a calm, malevolent rhythm. Once a second. A heartbeat counting down to oblivion. He backed away, his own breath catching in his throat. He pulled out his phone, his thumb shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to unlock it. He hit the speed dial for his head of security. Code red, he said, his voice a strained rasp he barely recognized. My location. There's a device in the Ferrari. Motion triggered, I think. Get everyone here. Now. The response was instantaneous. The next 4 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. 2 black, unmarked SUVs screeched around the corner, their tires protesting against the asphalt. Men in sharp, plain suits emerged, their movements fluid and economical. They weren't police. They were private security, the best money could buy, and their loyalty was to him alone. One agent immediately guided Adrian to a safe distance, while another, a former bomb disposal expert, approached the Ferrari with a caution that sent a fresh wave of cold through Adrian's body. A few tense seconds of examination passed. The agent looked up, his face grim, his voice low and tight through the comms in Adrian's ear. "Sir, confirmed. It's a custom-built explosive device. Pressure plate under the driver's seat is the primary trigger. The moment you sat down, it would have been instantaneous." Instantaneous. The word echoed in the sudden ringing silence of Adrian's mind. The police arrived, then the bomb squad, their sirens painting the tranquil suburban street in strobes of red and blue. A perimeter was established. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. But Adrian saw none of it. His entire world had shrunk to the small figure in the green jacket, standing on the sidewalk, now being spoken to by a uniformed officer. The boy whose name he would soon learn was Jamari Brooks was staring at his own worn-out sneakers, as if afraid he was the one in trouble. Adrian's legs, feeling disconnected from his body, carried him over to the boy. He knelt, putting himself on Jamari's level. The cacophony of sirens and official voices seemed to fade away. "Hey, Adrian," said his voice, soft. He had to clear his throat. "Hey, look at me." Jamari slowly lifted his head, his wide, dark eyes still swimming with the aftershock of his own bravery. "You saved my life," Adrian said the words, feeling inadequate, impossibly small. "Do you understand that what you did? You saved my life." Jamari gave a small, uncertain nod. The ground beneath Adrian's knees felt solid, real. The air in his lungs was a gift. Every beat of his heart was a testament to this child's courage. But as he looked at the boy, a new, sickening feeling began to curdle in his stomach, colder and sharper than the fear of the bomb. It was the memory of that first split-second reaction, the annoyance, the suspicion, the callous, ingrained instinct of a rich man dismissing a poor child. He had looked at his savior, and for one shameful moment had seen a nuisance. The bomb had been a threat to his body. But that realization, that was a crack running straight through the center of his soul. Every ghost has a name. Adrian Clark was about to learn the name of his. The hotel suite was a study in luxurious anonymity. Beige walls, impersonal art, and windows with glass so thick they rendered the city below a silent, glittering mirage. It was a fortress chosen by his security chief Graves, a man whose face was a permanent mask of grim competence. For the first time in his life, Adrian felt like a prisoner in the kind of luxury he had curated. He was physically safe, but his mind was a war zone. Graves stood beside him, a laptop open on the polished mahogany table. "We've isolated the footage from a neighbor's driveway camera across the street. It's grainy, but it's the best we have. On the screen, a figure in a dark hoodie moved with a furtive, hurried grace. The man crouched beside the Ferrari, a shadow detaching from other shadows. His face was obscured, a blur of pixels. Enhance Sector 7. Adrian commanded, his voice hoarse. Run it through the facial recognition algorithm. Cross-reference with former employees from the last 20 years. Graves's fingers flew across the keyboard. The image sharpened, distorted, then slowly resolved. The hood had fallen back for a fraction of a second, just enough for the camera to catch a profile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A name appeared on the screen, blinking next to the grainy photo. Malcolm Vance. The name landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Adrian felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't a rival CEO. It wasn't corporate espionage. It was a ghost. His ghost. Get me his file, Adrian whispered. A few clicks, and a life's worth of misery filled the screen. A digital tombstone. Subject Malcolm Vance, former lead engineer, Ethical Frameworks Division. Termination date, August 14th, 1910. Reason breach of contract, attempted theft of intellectual property. A lie Adrian's conscience screamed. A convenient corporate lie. The file continued. Post-termination, a string of failed startups. A declaration of bankruptcy in 2014. A divorce finalized in 2016, citing financial and emotional distress. And the final brutal entry, custody of sole daughter Annalise Vance, relinquished to maternal grandparents 2017. Adrian stared at the last line until the words blurred. He had known Malcolm was fired. He had known in a detached, abstract way that it had ruined his career. But he had never allowed himself to see this. The shrapnel. The collateral damage of a decision he had made in a cold boardroom 15 years ago. A daughter who was about Jamari's age. He stood up the suite, suddenly feeling suffocating. "I'm going out," he said, ignoring Graves's immediate protest. "I need to see the boy." This time, when Renee Brooks opened the door, her face was not just wary. It was exhausted and etched with a new layer of protective hardness. The media had started sniffing around. A local news van was parked at the end of the street. Her son, the accidental hero, was now a commodity. "Mr. Clark," she said, her tone flat. She didn't invite him in. "Please," Adrian began, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. "I won't stay long. I need to thank him." "Properly." She hesitated, her gaze searching his, looking for the angle, the hidden agenda. Seeing only a profound, hollowed-out exhaustion that mirrored her own, she stepped aside. The apartment was filled with the lingering smell of the spaghetti they'd had for dinner. Jamari was on the floor, using crayons to draw on a piece of paper. He looked up as Adrian entered, his eyes wide, but no longer terrified. There was a cautious curiosity now. Adrian knelt down, the expensive fabric of his trousers creasing on the worn linoleum floor. He felt like an alien, an intruder in this small sanctuary of normalcy. I wanted to give you this," Adrian said, extending a small, elegantly wrapped box. It contained the newest, most advanced Stark Industries tablet, loaded with every educational game and creative suite imaginable. Jamari took it, his eyes lighting up. "Wow. Thank you, mister." Adrian smiled, a genuine, fragile thing. "You're the one I should be thanking." He searched for the right words, the kind of thing a normal person might say to a child. His corporate vocabulary felt useless. "You showed incredible initiative and risk assessment skills, young man. A real paradigm shifter." Jamari looked at the tablet, then back at Adrian, his brow furrowed in confusion. He turned to his mother. "Mum," he whispered loud enough for Adrian to hear. "What's a paradigm? Is that like 25 cents? Renee's lips twitched an almost smile that she quickly suppressed. For the first time, Adrian felt a blush of heat on his neck. He stood up, facing Renee. "I know this is an intrusion," he said, his voice low. "I want to make sure you're both taken care of. Anything you need. A new house, a trust fund for his education." The wall went back up in Renee's eyes, instant and impenetrable. "We don't need your money, Mr. Clark. It's not about need. It's about what's right. He saved my life, and I'm grateful for that," she said, her voice sharp but steady. "I am, but I saw the news van outside. I know how this works. You turn us into your pet project, a feel-good story for your brand. The billionaire and the poor little boy who saved him. We are not a PR opportunity." She took a breath, and her next words hit him harder than any accusation of greed. "You're Adrian Clark, from Varys Link, The man whose Nexus AI is threatening to put half my friends at the hospital out of a job. You understand the irony here, don't you? Adrian had no answer. He stood there, a titan of industry, rendered speechless by a tired nurse in a small apartment. Her words didn't just sting. They laid bare the chasm between their worlds. He wasn't just a man who was saved by her son. He was the architect of the very storm she was trying to shelter her family from. "I should go," he finally said, his voice barely audible. He gave Jamari one last look and walked out the door. The feeling of being an intruder now solidified into a certainty. As he got into the back of his security vehicle, his phone buzzed. It was Graves. Sir Graves said, and the urgency in his tone was new. "You need to hear this. We found him. We found Malcolm Vance's online footprint. He's been posting for months on fringe anti-tech forums." Adrian waited, a cold dread coiling in his gut. "He has a blog, sir, a sort of manifesto." Graves paused. "He doesn't call his plan revenge. He calls it a necessary correction. He writes about the soul-crushing impact of automation, about corporations waging a silent war on the working class." Graves took a breath. "Sir, in his last post from 2 days ago, he wasn't just targeting you. He was making an example of you. He calls you patient zero of the disease your AI is spreading across the world. Some verdicts aren't read in a courtroom. They're screamed over a phone line, and the sentence is a lifetime of guilt." The air in the hotel suite was thick with a tension that felt electric. Graves stood by the window, a sentinel watching over a city that had hours ago tried to kill his client. Adrian sat at the table, his gaze fixed on the phone, now a direct line to the heart of his nightmare. On the other end of the line was a police negotiator, his voice a low professional murmur. "Mr. Clark, we have him contained. He's in a room at the Starlight Motel off the interstate. He's alone, but he's unstable. We're ready to breach." No, Adrian said the word, startling both Graves and the negotiator. "Not yet. Sir, the situation is volatile," the negotiator began. "I want to talk to him." Adrian insisted, his voice gaining a raw edge of command. "Adrian, that is a profoundly unwise decision," Graves interjected, turning from the window. "He is not a rational actor. He was rational once Adrian shot back, his eyes flashing with a desperate fire. He was the most rational man I knew. I need to hear it from him, Graves. I need to understand." He looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "Put me through." There was a moment of charged silence, a click, and then the sound of an open, static-filled line. For a few seconds there was only the sound of ragged breathing. Then a voice scraped raw by despair and rage, a voice that was a ghost of the one from his memories. Clark Malcolm Vance rasped. Of course, the great man himself calling to survey the wreckage. Adrian gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "Malcolm. Why, my God?" Why a laugh, brittle and broken, echoed down the line. "Why you built a multi-billion-dollar empire, and you're asking me why? You who looks at the world and sees only numbers on a balance sheet, you don't get to ask that question. I can help you." Malcolm Adrian said the words, sounding weak, hollow even to his own ears. "Whatever you need." "Lawyers' money." "Money." Malcolm screamed, the sound so violent Adrian flinched. "You think this is about money? I had a life, I had a family. I had a daughter who thought I was a hero. And you took it all. You took it all not with a gun, but with a termination clause and a press release that painted me as a thief. You tried to steal proprietary designs." "Malcolm." The board had proof. "Liar," the voice shrieked a sound of pure agony. "I tried to save it. I tried to save the soul of the machine we were building. I gave Nexus a heart, Adrian. A conscience, I built my daughter's decency into that code, a set of rules that said, do no harm, protect the human, assist, never replace. And you and your board of vultures, you ripped it out. You ripped out its heart because it was inefficient. Adrian's breath hitched. He saw the whiteboard again, saw Malcolm's passionate eyes. This code has a soul. He had called it idealism. Now he heard it for what it was, a warning. I was trying to build the future. Adrian whispered, his defense crumbling. You weren't building a future, you were building a slaughterhouse. Malcolm sobbed, the rage giving way to a wave of gut-wrenching pain. And you made me its first victim. I lost my job, my reputation. My wife looked at me and saw a failure. My own daughter. Do you have any idea what it's like to have your child look at you with pity? To have to explain why Daddy can't afford the rent? Why Daddy can't stop shaking? Why Daddy can't be the hero he promised he'd always be? Adrian was silent. The city lights outside blurred into a meaningless smear. The walls of the suite were closing in. This was the wreckage he had never let himself see. The human cost written in the ledger of a single broken man. That bomb wasn't for you. Adrian Malcolm's voice dropped to a conspiratorial, chilling whisper. Not really. It was a message. A demonstration. I wanted you just for 1 second to feel what my cousin felt, what Maria's friend at the hospital will feel, what millions of people will feel. That cold, sudden shock of knowing a machine, a line of code has just erased you. That your skills, your life, your purpose have been deemed obsolete. I wanted you to feel disposable. The truth of it, the terrible, twisted logic, slammed into Adrian with the force of a physical impact. The bomb wasn't simple revenge. It was a lecture, a final, desperate attempt by a creator to teach his creation a lesson about the sanctity of a human life. In the background, through the phone, Adrian heard a new sound, a muffled command, the splintering of wood. Police, drop it. Vance hands in the air. Malcolm let out one last, ragged sigh, a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Too late, he whispered into the phone, his final words meant only for Adrian. You already dropped it. 15 years ago. A clatter, a shout. The line went dead. Adrian sat there, the silent phone still pressed to his ear. The hum of the dial tone was the only sound in the room. He slowly lowered his hand, his fingers uncurling. The phone slipped from his grasp and hit the plush carpet with a soft, dull thud. He didn't see Graves moving towards him. He didn't hear the distant sirens. He saw only the ghost of Malcolm Vance, not as a monster, but as a prophet whose warnings he had ignored. And he heard the verdict not from a judge, but from the man he had destroyed. The bomb hadn't been Malcolm's punishment. It had been his. Adrian Clark, the Titan, the visionary, the king of an empire built on cold, hard logic, finally completely shattered. After the explosion comes the silence. A silence so loud, a man can finally hear the sound of his own soul breaking. For hours, Adrian sat unmoving in the sterile perfection of the hotel suite. The sun had set and the city lights had begun their nightly performance, but he saw none of it. Graves had tried to speak to him, offering reports, updates on Malcolm's processing logistical plans. Adrian had waved him away with a single numb gesture. He needed the silence. He needed to feel the full, crushing weight of the verdict that had been delivered over the phone. The ghost was no longer a phantom. It had a face, a voice, a story. A story in which Adrian Clark was not the hero, but the villain. His hands, moving with the slow, deliberate motion of an old man, found his laptop. He opened it, the soft glow of the screen illuminating his pale, drawn face. He didn't navigate to the news sites or his stock portfolio. He typed in a series of old passwords, accessing the deep digital archives of various link systems, a place he hadn't visited in over a decade. He found the folder almost instantly, its name a relic of a more optimistic time. Project Chimera. And inside it, a single document that now felt like a sacred text he had desecrated. Proposal Ethical Subroutines and Human Augmentation Framework. Author M. Vance. He clicked it open. It wasn't a dry, technical document. It was a symphony of code and prose, a passionate, brilliant treatise on the future. Malcolm's words, untouched by time, flowed across the screen, filled with a vision so pure it made Adrian's chest ache. The primary directive must be inviolable. Technology, particularly autonomous AI, must never be a replacement for human endeavor, but a partner to it. Its purpose is not to render a worker obsolete, but to free that worker from mundane tasks, to amplify their creativity, to act as a tireless assistant, so that they may achieve new heights of innovation and fulfillment. Adrian read on, scrolling through pages of elegant code and eloquent justification. Malcolm had designed safeguards, inhibitors, and feedback loops, all meant to create a symbiotic relationship between man and machine. He had foreseen the dangers of unchecked efficiency. He had built a conscience directly into the architecture, a conscience Adrian had ordered, stripped out and discarded like a faulty component. He closed the laptop, a wave of nausea washing over him. The success he had built, the empire he commanded, the very foundation of his identity, was all built upon the deliberate corruption of this beautiful humanistic dream. He hadn't just fired Malcolm. He had plagiarized his genius and then inverted it, turning a tool for liberation into a weapon of displacement. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he could not stay in this room. He could not hide behind his money or his security. There was only one person in the world who had looked him in the eye and told him a truth he hadn't wanted to hear, and he needed to hear it again. When Renee opened her door this time, she looked surprised. It was late. Adrian stood on her doorstep, not as a billionaire flanked by security, but as a solitary man, drenched in the dim yellow light of her porch. He looked smaller, somehow. Defeated. "Mr. Clark," she said, her voice holding a note of caution rather than hostility. "Is everything all right?" "No," he said, simply, honestly. "No, it's not." He met her gaze, and for the first time, he let her see past the corporate mask to the shattered man beneath. "May I come in, please?" She saw the raw, unvarnished pain in his eyes, and her nurse's instincts took over. She stepped aside and let him pass. They sat at her small kitchen table, the same table where he had first been confronted with her quiet dignity. For a long moment he just stared at his hands, struggling to assemble the words. "He's in custody," Adrian began, his voice low. "Malcolm Vance." "I saw it on the news," she said softly. "I spoke to him before they arrested him." He took a shaky breath. He told me everything. What I did to him. Why he did what he did. He finally looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He was right. About a lot of it. The things he said about my company. About me. He told her then, not everything, but enough. He spoke of Malcolm's original vision for Nexus, the ethical framework, the dream of human augmentation. And he spoke of his own ambition, the ruthless decision to choose profit over principle. "I thought I was building the future," he finished, his voice cracking. "I was just building a better cage, a more efficient one." Renee listened without interruption. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. When he was done, she was silent for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "In my line of work," she began, her voice calm and measured, We see all kinds of wounds, lacerations, breaks, infections. And you learn one thing very quickly. You can't heal a serious wound by just covering it up or throwing money at it. That only makes it fester. Adrian watched her, hanging on her every word. First, she continued, leaning forward slightly. You have to acknowledge the damage. All of it. You have to look right at it. Then you have to clean it out. Thoroughly. It's the most painful part. You have to remove every bit of debris, every last trace of what caused the infection. She paused, letting the metaphor sink in. Only then can you start to stitch it back together. It's slow work. It takes patience. It takes commitment. And it will always, always leave a scar. But if you do it right, the new tissue that grows back can be stronger than what was there before. She looked at him, her expression clear and direct. Your company, Mr. Clark. Your legacy. It's a wound, a deep one. And you can't fix it with a $5 million donation. That's just a bandage. You have to be willing to do the painful work of cleaning it out. The clarity of her analogy was like a light in a dark room. It was the most profound piece of business advice he had ever received, and it came from a nurse who made less in a year than he made in 5 minutes. A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of gratitude, of release. How he whispered, I don't even know where to start. You start by deciding that the health of the patient is more important than the cost of the treatment, she said simply. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying lifting from his shoulders. He felt a flicker of hope, a path forward illuminated by this woman's quiet strength. He looked at her, a wry, tired smile touching his lips for the first time. So, you'll be my moral compass. Renee held his gaze, and he saw a spark of humor in her eyes, a sign that she saw the man, not just the mess. She smiled back, a genuine warm smile that transformed her face. A moral compass, huh? She said, her tone teasingly light. I hope you know my consulting rate is significantly higher than my nursing salary. She leaned back in her chair. And I expect excellent coffee. Adrian laughed. A real laugh, raw and rusty from disuse. It was a sound of life in the midst of all the wreckage. The tension in the room finally broke, replaced by a new, fragile sense of partnership. He grew serious again, the path forward now clear in his mind. The work would be immense, the consequences severe. But for the first time it felt possible. He met her warm, intelligent gaze. Then help me, he said, his voice imbued with a new and unfamiliar resolve. Help me hold the needle and thread. To change a company is hard. To change its soul is nearly impossible. But for Adrian Clark, he knew it was the only price for redemption. The following morning, the fragile hope forged in Renee's kitchen had crystallized into a core of unyielding resolve. The numbness was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. Adrian spent 2 hours on the phone, his voice a low, steady instrument of command. He wasn't speaking to security teams or public relations experts. He was speaking to lawyers, to accountants, to the members of his board, summoning them for an emergency meeting. The news was met with a spectrum of reactions, from confused annoyance to outright hostility. But Adrian was the founder. He was still the majority shareholder. When he called, they came. They gathered that afternoon in the cavernous boardroom on the 60th floor of the Varys Link Tower. It was a space designed to intimidate a symphony of dark wood, polished chrome, and cold leather, with a panoramic view of a city that bowed at its feet. Seated around the massive table were the 7 board members, a collection of old money investors and venture capitalists who had ridden his vision to obscene levels of wealth. Their faces were masks of impatient skepticism. At the head of the table sat Chairman Davenport, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held the predatory glint of a shark that had never missed a meal. Adrian Davenport began his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel. "This is highly irregular. The press is already in a frenzy over the incident. The market opens tomorrow. We trust you have a strategy to mitigate the damage." Adrian stood his hands resting on the back of his chair. He met each of their gazes one by one. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet, resolute fire. "There is no mitigating the damage, Gerald," he said, his voice filling the silent room. "Because the damage has already been done. Not just to me or to our stock price, but to the very fabric of the trust we ask society to place in us." He began to speak. For 20 minutes he laid out his plan. He didn't just talk about new philanthropic initiatives or PR campaigns. He spoke of a fundamental tectonic shift in their corporate philosophy. He spoke of pivoting Nexus, their golden goose, from a model of human replacement to one of human augmentation. He spoke of investing billions in retraining programs, of open sourcing their ethical subroutines, of prioritizing long-term social stability over short-term quarterly gains. He was proposing to take their most profitable weapon and turn it into a plowshare. When he finished, the silence was absolute, heavy with disbelief. Then Davenport laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Let me see if I have this straight, Adrian," he said, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "A mentally unstable, disgruntled ex-employee tries to kill you, and your response is to gut our company's most profitable division based on his manifesto." Another board member, a woman named Catherine, chimed in. "Adrian, this is an emotional reaction to trauma. It's understandable, but it is not a business strategy. The market will see this as weakness. They will crucify us. They see us as predators already." Adrian countered, his voice steady. "And they are not wrong. We have preached progress while creating anxiety. We have celebrated efficiency while engineering obsolescence for millions of hard-working people. We have grown rich on the fear we ourselves have sown." He leaned forward to his hands, pressing down on the table. "That bomb wasn't built in a motel room, Gerald. It was built in this boardroom 15 years ago. It was built with every corner we cut, every ethical concern we dismissed, every human cost we wrote off as an acceptable loss for the sake of a rising stock price. Malcolm Vance was just the man who finally decided to light the fuse." The air crackled. He had turned their argument, their entire worldview, back on them. He was no longer just a CEO, he was a witness, and they were all co-conspirators. Davenport's face hardened. "This is sentimental nonsense. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders, and that duty is to maximize profit. What you are proposing is a dereliction of that duty. Our first duty," Adrian said, his voice dropping but gaining intensity, "is to not create the conditions for our own destruction. What happens when the next Malcolm Vance succeeds? What happens when public opinion turns so fiercely against us that governments are forced to regulate us out of existence? What I am proposing is not just a moral strategy. It is the only survival strategy left." He owned 51% of the company. In the end, it wasn't his logic or his plea that would win. It was his power. But he needed them to understand. The debate raged for another hour, a battle of ideologies fought with spreadsheets and stock projections versus moral arguments and a vision of a different future. Later that evening, back in the quiet of his suite, Adrian made another call. This one was not to a board member. It was to a private wealth manager in a different city. "I need you to set up a new trust," Adrian said, his voice low. An educational fund. It must be completely anonymous. No link to me or any of my companies. The sole beneficiary is a minor Annalise Vance. He provided the details, the amount enough to cover any university, any dream she could possibly have, and the legal framework that would make it untraceable. There was no satisfaction in the act, no feeling of magnanimity. It was just a quiet, necessary repair. A single stitch on a wound he knew would never fully close. It wasn't forgiveness, it was simply an acknowledgement of a debt. His final meeting of the day was with Renee. He had asked her to meet him in a neutral space, a private lounge in the hotel. He didn't want to intrude on her home again. He had a formal proposal printed and bound in a simple black folder. It detailed the creation of the Varus Link Ethical Oversight Committee. It outlined the committee's power, its independent budget, and its authority to review and veto new technologies based on their potential societal impact. And it detailed the role he was offering her board member, with a salary that was 10 times her nursing income and the resources to make a real difference. She read through the entire document in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at him. "This is real," she said. It wasn't a question. "It has to be," Adrian replied. "The people on your board, they won't like having someone like me in the room. That's precisely why you need to be there," he said. "I have a boardroom full of people who know how to read a balance sheet. I need someone in there who knows how to read a person's face when they're afraid of losing their job." She was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. He knew what she was weighing, the safety of her quiet life against the chance to effect real change. Finally, she met his eyes, and he saw the same resolve he felt in himself. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." The vote in the boardroom had been a formality, a bitter pill the members were forced to swallow. 4 against 3, 4. But with Adrian's majority share, the motion passed. His pivot was now official company policy. As the meeting adjourned, the members filed out in stony silence, leaving only Adrian and Davenport. The old chairman walked over to Adrian, his face a mask of cold fury. He stood before him, a titan of the old guard, looking at the man who was threatening to dismantle it. "You've won the vote," Clerk Davenport said, his voice a low growl. "But you've signed this company's death warrant. You've traded a lion for a lamb, and the wolves of the market are going to tear it to shreds." He leaned in closer. "This moral crusade of yours, this is your funeral. I hope it's worth it." Davenport turned and walked away, leaving Adrian alone in the cavernous room, the weight of his decision settling upon him. He had won the battle for his company, but the war for its soul he knew was just beginning. Peace isn't given. It's built one difficult choice at a time. The grand ballroom of the Hilton Elysia was suffocating in its own opulence. Crystals dripped from the chandeliers like frozen tears, casting a cold, glittering light on the most powerful people in the tech industry. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet ambition, hummed with a single unspoken question. What would Adrian Clark say? They were all there. The investors, their smiles tight with financial anxiety. The rival CEOs, their faces masks of feigned concern, secretly hoping for a train wreck. The journalists, their pens and cameras poised like surgical tools ready to dissect every word. They were a flock of vultures, and they all expected to feast on a corporate carcass. They expected apologies, deflections, and a large headline-grabbing donation to make the problem go away. When Adrian walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. He didn't look like a man on the verge of ruin. He looked calm, centered, the old, brittle arrogance replaced by a quiet, grounded strength. He approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let his gaze sweep across the sea of expectant faces. "Good evening." He began, his voice, steady and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate philanthropy. We're here to talk about giving back. But before I do that, I need to talk about what was taken away. And I need to introduce you to the person who gave it back to me." He turned to the side of the stage. "Jamari, will you come out here, please?" A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd as Jamari Brooks, dressed in a small, perfectly fitted, navy blue suit, walked shyly onto the stage. He held Adrian's hand, looking out at the hundreds of strangers with a child's unfiltered awe. Adrian knelt, bringing the microphone down to Jamari's level. 2 weeks ago, he told the audience, his voice soft but resonant. I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. A mistake that would have been my last. But this young man, using nothing more than his eyes, his heart and a voice he wasn't afraid to use, stopped me. He saved my life. He is a hero in the truest sense of the word. The ballroom erupted in a wave of polite, then genuinely enthusiastic applause. This was the story they had come for, the heartwarming tale of the billionaire and the brave little boy. Adrian let the applause swell, then gently quiet. He stood up but kept a hand on Jamari's shoulder. "But that's not the whole story," he continued, and the room grew quiet again, sensing a shift. Jamari's courage didn't just save me from a physical threat. It forced me to confront a much deeper one, a crisis of conscience that has been at the heart of my company and at the heart of our industry for far too long. He took a breath. For years we have chased progress. We have worshipped at the altar of efficiency. We have built machines of astonishing intelligence, and we have called it the future. My company, Varus Link, has been at the forefront of that movement. And my creation, the Nexus AI, has been celebrated for its ability to optimize, to streamline, and to cut costs. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room again, this time with a new intensity. But that is a sanitized corporate way of saying that we have taught a machine how to make a human being feel obsolete. We have gotten rich by engineering anxiety. And I stand here tonight to say that the public's fear, the backlash, the anger, it is not misplaced. You are right to be afraid. Because we, the architects of this future, lost our way. A stunned silence fell over the ballroom. This was not in the script. This was a confession. The man who planted a bomb in my car was a former employee, a brilliant engineer whose ethical warnings I dismissed 15 years ago in the name of profit. He was the first victim of a philosophy that has since claimed the jobs, the security, and the dignity of millions. What he did was monstrous, but the despair that drove him, we created it. In our boardrooms, on our balance sheets. He looked out at the sea of pale, shocked faces. That ends tonight. Effective immediately, Varus Link is undertaking a complete philosophical and operational pivot. The Nexus platform will be fundamentally re-engineered. Its primary function will no longer be replacement, but augmentation. It will be a tool to empower workers, not to eliminate them. We will be investing the entirety of this quarter's profits not into stock buybacks, but into the largest tech retraining and job placement program this country has ever seen. We will no longer build a future that leaves people behind. He then turned to the wings again, and to ensure we never lose our way again, I am announcing the formation of a new independent ethical oversight committee with the power to audit and veto any project that does not put human well-being first. To lead that committee, I needed someone with a deep practical understanding of how technology impacts real lives. Someone with an unshakable moral compass. He smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my new partner and my moral compass, Ms. Renee Brooks. Renee walked onto the stage poised and dignified. The applause this time was scattered, confused, but also filled with a new and growing sense of awe. Adrian had not just given a speech. He had ignited a revolution. 6 months later, the world hadn't ended. Varus Link's stock had taken a massive hit, then slowly, miraculously began to climb back as a new class of ethical investors bought in. Competing tech firms caught off guard were now scrambling to announce their own AI for good initiatives. The conversation had changed. At Renee's hospital, a nurse laughed as she tapped on a screen. The new assistive Nexus AI had just perfectly organized her patient charts for the entire week, flagging potential medication conflicts and freeing her up for an extra hour of direct patient care. It was a tool, not a threat. A partner. The final scene was not in a boardroom or a ballroom. It was in a public park on a bright Saturday afternoon. The sun was warm, the air filled with the sounds of children laughing. Adrian in jeans and a simple sweater was on his hands and knees in the grass, helping Jamari build an elaborate fortress out of sticks and leaves. Renee sat on a nearby bench, watching them, a peaceful, easy smile on her face. They were a team, a family forged in the crucible of a crisis. The relationship between Adrian and Renee had blossomed into a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared purpose. "You're getting better at this not talking like a CEO thing," Renee called out, her voice filled with gentle teasing. Adrian looked up and grinned, a real unburdened grin that reached his eyes. "It's a work in progress," he called back. "Yesterday he asked me for the Q3 earnings report on his new Lego castle. I had to tell him his profit margins were down due to excessive candy consumption." Jamari giggled, placing a final triumphant leaf on top of his fortress. Adrian stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees, and went to sit beside Renee on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching her son, their hero, conquer his imaginary world. There were no more ghosts. There were no more bombs. The past was not forgotten, but it had been confronted, and its wounds were healing into scars. The path ahead would be challenging, but they would walk it together. This was peace. Not the empty, silent peace of a penthouse, but the warm, vibrant, living peace that had to be fought for. The peace that had to be earned. A peace that is earned is the only kind that truly lasts. Adrian's journey wasn't just about escaping a bomb. It was about dismantling the one he had built inside his own legacy piece, by painful piece. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often does a single moment of courage, a child's desperate scream, not only save a life, but provide the catalyst to redeem a soul? Perhaps the most powerful technologies we have are not the ones made of silicon and code, but the simple human ones. Courage, compassion, and the willingness to choose a harder, better path. This story of a difficult earned peace has left us with so many thoughts, and we believe the best stories are the ones we can share and discuss together. We'd love to know what you think. What do you believe was Adrian's true moment of redemption? Was it when he finally confronted his past, or when he took concrete action to change his company's future? We are also on our own journey of growth, and your feedback is our guide. If any part of this story touched you, or if you have an idea on how we can make our storytelling even more powerful, please let us know in the comments. Your insights are truly invaluable to us. If this story resonated with you, a simple like helps us know we've connected. And if you feel its message about responsibility and second chances is worth sharing, please do. To continue exploring these complex emotional journeys with us, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss where we go next. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay kind, and thank you for watching.